Capcom's been on a bit of a roll with the Resident Evil franchise of late. After Resident Evil 6 nearly dashed all hope of the franchise's continued existence, seriously, it was that mediocre, Resident Evil 7 functioned as a first-person soft reboot of the franchise. While we're still a ways away from the next mainline entry in the franchise, Capcom's been cooking up some wonderful remakes of the originals. Resident Evil 2 exceeded expectations and delivered a solid, current-gen experience while still doing justice to the original. And this year, in just a short while, we'll be getting the Resident Evil 3 remake. While both of the remakes are marvels of 8th gen graphics rendering, it's a good idea to point out now that the original Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil 3 were hailed as masterpieces of their time. Exactly why is that though? In this piece, we'll be taking a look at the technology powering 1999's Resident Evil 3. Pre-rendered backgrounds, cross-gen tech that shined on all platforms. In this day and age, cross-generation titles are something of a norm. Some of the biggest games around, titles like Cyberpunk 2077 and Halo Infinite, are set to be cross-gen experiences. With Moore's Law having slowed down considerably, and because we've already hit the point of diminishing returns with computer graphics, cross-gen titles aren't exactly in the awkward position they were in earlier. Scalability today means dropping the resolution, lowering the frame rate, and making judicious cuts to model quality and LOD scaling. This was not the case when Resident Evil 3 arrived. The game was released on a 5th gen platform, the original PlayStation, and two 6th gen platforms, the Dreamcast and the GameCube. The Dreamcast release was particularly important because, in 1999, the Dreamcast was the only 6th gen console out on the market. The power differential between the Dreamcast and the PlayStation 1 was far greater than the gap separating the Xbox One X and Xbox Series X. The Dreamcast was over 10 times as powerful as the original PlayStation. Moreover, it featured a dedicated Power VR graphics processing unit delivering 1.4 G-flops of raw compute. The Dreamcast was able to deliver vast, immersive open-world experiences like Shenmue 2 that were far, far beyond the capabilities of the PlayStation 1. This created a unique challenge for the team at Capcom. How are they going to create a title that looked and ran great on both these platforms without making too many compromises? There were a lot of ways that it could go wrong. Cross-gen titles of the era were infamously hit and miss. Capcom worked around this issue in an innovative way. They made use of pre-rendered backgrounds on all versions of the game, with polygonal 3D player characters, NPCs, and objects added on top. This wasn't a new technique. They used the same approach as far back as 1996 and the original Resident Evil on PlayStation. The pre-rendered backgrounds freed up the polygon budget so that the character models could have a higher polygon count. While they still aren't quite on par with 6th gen characters, Resident Evil 3's character models on PS1 were among the finest seen to date on the platform, barring fighting games like Tekken 3. Higher resolution, better asset quality. A genuine Dreamcast outing. This isn't to say that the Dreamcast version of the game was lacking. A number of crucial upgrades ensured that Resident Evil 3 positively sang on the world's first 6th gen console, elevating the visual well above PlayStation 1 standards. What are some of the key changes that Resident Evil 3's Dreamcast version brought to the table? For starters, the resolution is ramped up significantly. While the PlayStation 1 is technically capable of rendering games at up to 640 by 480, a native 480i output was rarely seen in games, barring fighting games and racers. Resident Evil 3 on the PlayStation 1 rendered at 320 by 240. This had a significant impact on image quality. Pre-rendered backgrounds lost a good chunk of fine detail and models looked chunky even with the relatively high polygon counts. The Dreamcast version of Resident Evil 3 ran at a native 640 by 480. This delivered 4 times the raw pixel count of the PlayStation 1 version. Pre-rendered backgrounds shone at the higher resolution, revealing fine detail. Moreover, the higher resolution did proper justice to the real-time 3D character models and objects, allowing, for example, the NPC fingers to be clearly distinguished as opposed to the PlayStation 1 version's mitten hands. Resident Evil 3's Dreamcast version did more than just increasing the resolution though. Asset quality throughout the game, both the pre-rendered backgrounds and 3D models, are of a higher standard. The Dreamcast deploys high-quality artwork for the assets that's matched only by the PC and later 6th generation outings of the game. Model quality also sees noticeable improvements. Polygon counts on the player character are ramped up significantly relative to the PS1 version. Together with the increase in overall resolution, this allows for significantly greater perceived detail. Not all assets are lavished with equal care though. Certain NPC models appear to be identical to their PlayStation 1 counterparts, though they still look better at 640 by 480. The other side of CrossGen. How did the Dreamcast version stack up against the GameCube? It's a testament to the Dreamcast's pioneering hardware that the 1999 Dreamcast version is near indistinguishable from Resident Evil 3's 2003 re-release on GameCube. Both were based on the Windows version of Resident Evil 3 and delivered at a native 480p output with near identical asset quality. Interestingly, load times and stutter were actually slightly more pronounced on GameCube compared to Dreamcast. Capcom clearly delivered on its promise to craft a cross-gen game that shone on all platforms. Lessons from Resident Evil 3: building cross-gen games with just the right nips and tucks. In today's console space, Resident Evil 3 offers some important insights. Both Microsoft and Sony have spoken extensively about backwards compatibility and cross-gen, cross-platform support for upcoming titles. This means we'll spend a considerable amount of time experiencing a cross-gen transition period. While the disparity between the PlayStation 1 and Dreamcast is a lot more pronounced than that between the Xbox One X and Xbox Series X, for instance, there are lessons that can be learned here. What Capcom did with Resident Evil 3 was to identify pain points on the weakest platforms. The biggest pain point was the lack of 3D hardware grunt, meaning a limited polygon budget. They addressed this fundamental problem by utilizing pre-rendered backgrounds, then scaled up asset quality so that the game would still offer a great experience on more powerful platforms. When it comes to cross-gen experiences between 8th gen and 9th gen platforms, the biggest disparity will be in terms of processing power. Unlike the PS1 Dreamcast divide, the big differentiator isn't graphics capabilities. When building cross-gen experiences, developers will need to use 8th gen CPU capabilities as a baseline for world simulation, physics, AI, and other CPU-intensive functions. What they can scale is asset quality and resolution. If the big bottleneck, CPU power, is addressed, everything from the Xbox One S right up to the Xbox Series X and PlayStation 5 should be able to run cross-gen titles that do justice to their respective platforms, look great, and don't come off as lazy ports. Resident Evil 3 showed the way 20 years ago. We're interested to see just how far developers will push their cross-gen titles over the next 2 to 3 years. And that wraps it up. If you like what we are doing, please consider subscribing to our channel, and don't forget to switch on the bell notification icon. That way you will never miss out on any of our videos.